Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're going to give it another minute for folks to get in, and then we'll get started. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This is Cuyahoga County Emergency Management's speaker series, the third of three in our series. I am going to turn it over to our director, Mark Christie, to introduce our speaker. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay, Kevin? You like thumbs up?
Yes.
All right, perfect. As Kevin just mentioned, welcome to our third installment of our 2022 speaker series. Hopefully, you guys on the call have been able to join some of the earlier ones we had on self-care and cybersecurity, but this does round out the last one of 2022. And again, if you are new to our series, it is our effort to try to bring interesting and pertinent topics to our public safety partners in our county, and expose them to an expert in a particular field or subject area, and walk away with some lessons learned that can be applied to improve operations and efforts within the organization. So we're excited today to have a topic on integration of access and functional needs into emergency planning. It's a very important topic, and we're very privileged to have Vance Taylor come to our session from California. Before I turn over to him and introduce him, I just want to mention that similar to our previous presentations, we do ask that you withhold questions or till the end, or preferably put them into the Q&A feature into this presentation, and Kevin will then read the questions out loud for everyone to hear at the end of the presentation. So with that, let me introduce Vance. Vance Taylor is the Chief of the Office of Access and Functional Needs at the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. Vance is responsible for ensuring the needs of individuals with disabilities and persons with access or functional needs are identified before, during, and after disasters and integrated into the state's emergency management systems. Born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area, Vance was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy as a child and uses a power wheelchair. He has worked in Washington, D.C. as an advisor for two different members of Congress, directed security policy at a National Water Association, and been a principal at a ranked Homeland Security and emergency management consulting firm. Vance is a nationally recognized public speaker and advocate for individuals with disabilities. Vance has a master's degree in Homeland Security from the University of Connecticut and an undergraduate degree from Brigham Young University in Communications. He is married and has two daughters. With that, Vance, I will turn it over to you, and thank you very much again for being with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate the invite. It's good to be with the group. There we go. All right, great. Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm coming in from California, so I don't know what the weather it's like for you. Probably it's a little warmer here. I'm not sure. We're finally getting some much needed rain, which, like I said, for us, much needed. I appreciate not just the invite, but the introduction. As Mark said, my name is Vance Taylor. I'm the Chief of the Office of Access and Functional Needs at Cal OES. The actual full title is a mouthful. It's not quite the longest title in state government, but it is pretty long. I think there's probably an unwritten rule that there's like a competition, the longest title wins. I'm pretty close on that front. I'm originally from California, born and raised here. I was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy when I was 7. So I've spent the majority of my life using a power chair. I went out of state for college, came back. My plan was to do grad school. I decided to get a little bit of work experience. So I actually moved 3,000 miles away from everything I knew and was familiar to me. Then I went to Washington, D.C., and I interned for a member of Congress. And the plan was be there for 3 months because that was all I could afford, and then come back. But about a month and a half in, I actually got a job offer. So I thought, all right, well, I'm going to stay for a year. Then after a year, I'll come back to California. Well, I blinked, and somehow 13 years had passed. And I found that I'd worked for 2 different members of Congress, a trade association, and was then a principal at a consulting firm. Along the way, I'd gotten married, had 2 kids. And, this is just kind of the way that life changes. Over the course of my career, I started working on immigration, but when you're on the Hill and you're doing immigration, it changed from dealing with H-1B visas, then after 9/11 to how do you keep terrorists from coming across the border? And that evolved into Homeland Security. And I enjoyed it. I changed offices. I worked for a different member of Congress after that because she was on the Homeland Security Committee. And so it gave me an opportunity to do a deep dive. Then we found, as a nation, sort of this interesting realization after Hurricane Katrina that it's not just guns, guards, gates that stop bad things from happening, right? That you can't buy risk down to 0. That even if you have a gun, a guard, or a gate, that's not going to stop a hurricane or a flood or a tornado or an earthquake or even a wildfire. And so I started looking more at emergency management. And what was interesting about emergency management was it didn't matter what the cause of the disaster was. You were dealing with the consequence of the incident or event. And in looking at the way that we were dealing with emergency management, it became really clear to me that there were some fundamental gaps that had been built into our system. Those gaps, I think, were put under a very bright light during Hurricane Katrina. Right? It was during Hurricane Katrina we saw that 70% of everyone who perished had an access or functional need. Right? What does that say about the way that we plan, prepare, respond, or recover? Right? Historically, we have not been very inclusive in that process when we think about things like access and functional needs. Now, when asked that question, why is there such a disproportionate impact? The answer really came back that there was a limited perspective. That emergency managers, who I would describe as salt of the earth people, typically were coming from first responder type jobs, right? You had a lot of former law enforcement, former military, good people wanting to do good things, but that they didn't have much experience, much lived experience with access and functional needs. And, the example I give about perspective is this. Because I use a power chair, and I have for most of my life, whenever I go into a room, I'm constantly scanning that room almost at a subconscious level for access. Right? Can I get around? Are the pathways cluttered? Are there steps, stairs? Is there a ramp? That's because my lived experience tells me I have to look for those things. But if you walk into a room with me, chances are you're probably not looking for any of those things. Right? And that's okay. It's just because you have a different lived experience than I do. And that's not that one is good and the other is bad. It's just that because of our perspectives, we can see the same thing and view it differently. And that's what was happening with emergency management. That emergency managers were playing with other emergency managers. And they would say things like, hey, when there's a disaster, we'll let people know about it by doing a press conference. And that's great. But oftentimes, because of that limited perspective, nobody thought to say, hey, this message that goes out, right, this life-saving information that we're trying to push to the community is going to literally fall on deaf ears. And so there was no ASL interpreter. Nobody stopped to consider the fact that when you point at an evacuation map and say, go here for safety, that if you're blind or have low vision, that doesn't mean much to you. You can't process that. People didn't consider that if all the information you put out's in English, then individuals who don't speak English aren't going to know what's coming. How do I prepare? What appropriate action should I take? And so we found that those individuals were left on their own to figure out what was going on and what to do. And of course, it translated into dangerous outcomes. And it wasn't just with communications. It was also with things like transportation. That to evacuate a community, you would say, wow, everybody load up on a school bus and that's how we're going to get folks out. But somebody would show up in a wheelchair and say, well, where's the ramp? Where's the lift? And there wasn't one. And so that person would have to choose between getting picked up out of their chair, placed on a bus, knowing that whenever you get to wherever it is you're going, I'm not going to have my legs with me, or staying in their wheelchair and remaining in the impact area and just hoping that it was going to be okay. It's a terrible choice to have to make. When we looked at sheltering, we saw that sometimes you had shelters in buildings that weren't physically accessible, or they'd be set up on the second floor of a building with no working elevator. And so people would show up, they couldn't access the shelter. Or if they could go in, that it was physically accessible, but it was not programmatically accessible. Meaning there's nobody to assist with feeding. There's nobody to assist with toileting. with transferring people in and out of their cots, their wheelchairs to their cots. And so oftentimes people with disabilities, if they showed up without their support networks, would need to just wait. And they oftentimes languished before they could get the help they needed. So all of this created a rift, right? A divide between emergency management and the community. And for a long time, the community felt like the only way that they can get change within emergency management is to pursue that change through litigation. And so you had all kinds of court cases going through. And in California, we had it up and down the state. Now, the thing is, when a judge drops a gavel and orders a jurisdiction to take action, that's not the same as partnership, right? So while action might be taken, the relationship remained frayed. So trying to deal with these dynamics and also recognizing that in an age of climate change, we're dealing with more and more disasters, right? That there's an exponentially increasing number of incidents and events that we're dealing with. California decided to lean forward and try and get in front of this. It did so by creating the Office of Access and Functional Needs and placing it within the Governor's Office of Emergency Services. And so the office was created and a gubernatorially appointed chief was put in as a senior level executive to brief the governor and the director on these issues. Now, as chief, and I've served in that capacity since 2015, I really have sort of this two-part mission, right? The first part is to identify what are the needs that people have before, during, and after disasters. And then, once those needs have been identified, to work with community-based organizations, to work with advocates, to work with whole community partners and stakeholders to integrate those needs throughout every facet of the emergency management process. And that's what we've done. Now, what does that look like? Right? So I can tell you that when I first came on, I'd been on for just a couple of weeks. And it's funny, they gave me this phone. It was like, when this phone rings, you got to answer it. This is like the bat phone, right? So the bat phone rings. It was a Sunday morning. I'd been on for just a couple of weeks. And I thought, well, that's not good. And they tell me that there was, at the time, what became the third worst fire in state history at the time, that erupted in Northern California. So I went to the State Operations Center, got briefed, and a couple hours later, was sighted up north to the impact area. Now, if you're not from California, you don't know, but to get to Lake County where this fire was, you've got to go up Highway 20, which is probably the curviest, windiest highway in the world. And it goes forever. So you're going round and round and round. And right when you feel like you're going to throw up, you come around the last bend and the valley opens up. And it's beautiful. but not on that day. On that day, it looked like a bomb had gone off. It was like I'd been transported into a scene from a post-apocalyptic type movie. And I remember it was so eerie because the whole way there had been sunny. But once it was down in the valley, there was so much ash and it was so thick that it literally darkened out the sun. Smoke was coming in through the vents, burning my eyes, my throat. Every car was going this way. I was going that way, which caused me to question my life decisions at that point. I remember pulling into a shelter, and it was very clear that in the rush to set it up, right, to open it so people could go, certain steps that had been overlooked or altogether skipped. The parking lot was chaos. You had cars, trucks, vehicles of every make and model parked every way but the right way. Remember, there was a truck parked sideways, taking up 4 placard spots. I thought, hashtag not cool. So the community had started delivering donations, but shelter management had dropped those donations in front of the curb cuts. So the only way for me to access the shelter in my wheelchair was to deploy my ramp up onto the sidewalk and to access it that way. So I did. And out, started taking a shelter tour. And the whole time, the shelter manager was like, "I'm sorry for this and that. I know it's a little rough around the edges." And he was right. The general population area was tough to get through. Right? The cots were too close together. Couldn't really fit through the aisles. The bathrooms were accessible-ish, which was pretty rough. But he kept saying, you know, we've got these accessible showers. They're built into the facility. They're amazing. You're gonna love this. And that's important, right? That's an important feature to have at a shelter. So at the end of the tour, we end up in this room where he says, "Okay, let's go check out the showers. We got to go through that doorway." And I asked, "Is that the only way to get there?" He says, "Yeah, it's one way in, one way out." And I said, "Well, I think we got a problem." Because the doorway in question was actually a set of double doors divided down the middle with an iron bar making each individual passageway too narrow for my wheelchair to get through. And the shelter manager was like, "Well, what if I push? Can we cram your chair through?" I was like, "No, you're gonna break my chair." Not on my skinniest day was I gonna fit through that doorway. And I could see the wheels turning. And it's like the light bulb went off. And he says, "Wait, but if you can't make it through in your wheelchair, then other people in their wheelchairs can't make it through either." I said, "Now you're getting it." Right? So I called the State Operations Center. And I said, we need to get portable accessible showers here. And the first question was, what's a portable accessible shower? And briefed them up. They did some digging, they called back, they said, we've got immediate access to 5 showers. Now, you got to remember, I'm a native Californian, but I'd been gone for 13 years. I knew that California was the world's, at the time, 5th largest economy. We're now the 4th largest economy. I like to think I put us over the top there. I knew that CalOES is one of the world's premier emergency management agencies. And so when they said, you've got immediate access to 5 showers, I honestly thought they meant 500. And so I felt like the Oprah Winfrey of the shelter, right? I was like, you get a shower, you get a shower. Like, we all get showers. And what they realized was, this guy doesn't understand. So they said, Vance, it's not 500, it's 5 individual, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 showers. And I thought, well, that's a lot less exciting. All 5 showers were being used at a concert in Southern California. So we literally had to commandeer these showers, which I thought was junk because nobody showers at Burning Man. So what are they doing down there anyway? But nonetheless, we had to commandeer the showers, which it's nice sometimes to have the G word in the title, governor. I'll tell you as a side note, if you ever get a chance to commandeer something, do it. It's awesome. It goes to your head though. I got home, I was like, I commandeered the remote, I commandeered the salt shaker. My family got tired of it. But by the time we got these showers up north, deployed, installed, they're operational, it was 4 days. Now, 4 days for government, that's like breakneck speed. But 4 days when you're stuck at a shelter, that's an eternity to wait for a shower. I remember I was talking to one of my colleagues. He was in logistics. And I thanked him. I said, hey, Tim, thanks so much for, everything you did to get this going. And Tim's like, oh, just do my job. No problem. But I didn't get the sense that Tim actually understood the meaning or the impact of what we had done. So I said, so let me tell you what I saw at the shelter that day. I saw people on the worst day of their lives. I saw people who, through no fault of their own, were homeless. I talked to a lady who told me what it was like to be evacuated so quickly. Her neighbor picked her up out of her chair, laid her in the bed of his pickup truck, and then she drove off and watched as her home burned down with her wheelchair inside. And so it was tough, right? It's very difficult. People were in a tough circumstance. Yep, hold on, I'm trying to fix my camera here. There we go. Excellent. So I said, Tim, it was hot at that shelter. It was muggy at that shelter. We were sweaty. at that shelter, and ash, which was everywhere, was floating around. Then we learned that it sticks to sweat. It forms a grime that covers your body. So think of yourself after you've been to the gym or after you've done maybe work in the yard, you're feeling super gross. That's what we felt. And in the midst of all that, I had to be the one to tell people that because we hadn't integrated their needs, that they had no choice but to sit in their filth and wait until we could figure something out. So can you imagine what the showers meant when they finally arrived? I went to the shelter, I asked people about their experiences, and they said things like, I felt like myself again. That I showered all the grime off and felt like me. I had somebody else say, just standing there watching other people that couldn't hop in and out of the showers like I could. And my heart broke for them. And when they'd go in and shower and come back, they looked like different people physically and emotionally. So it was impactful. I said, Tim, you weren't just doing your job. You were integrating access and functional needs. And in doing so, you were changing lives. That moment really became a changing point for us as an agency. That we really adopted this, never again type of attitude. But never again were people going to just languish at a shelter because we hadn't integrated their needs on the front end. And so we've taken this approach of integrated planning and started to work that through communities across the state, where recognizing that there are often rifts between the community and emergency managers, we bring folks to the table. I always joke that in my wheelchair, I've got 2 wheels in with the community and 2 wheels in with emergency managers. And I have to straddle that line. But we bring the partners to the table. And it's interesting because it's been said, and I've seen it to be true. It's difficult to hate people up close. And so, whereas sometimes you've got adversarial relationships that existed, when you get people talking and planning and coordinating together, they start to see one another's humanity, shared interest, common goals, seeing that they're operating with the same mission and objectives in mind. That starts to build trust. That ultimately leads to the development of better products. It leads to emergency operation plans that address the needs of all the members of the community. And when things go wrong, and inevitably in a disaster, something's going to come up that you hadn't planned for. We move away from what folks used to say, which is your plan failed us. And we move towards what they say now, which is our plan needs to be updated. And that shift between your plan and our plan makes all the difference. And so that's what we preach, teach, push out. And so we've been doing that. Now, fast forward 3 years, almost 3 years to the day, actually. The phone goes off. I'm told about fires in Lake County again. I go to the State Operations Center, briefed, and once again, find myself on Highway 20, winding round and round and round. This time having taken Dramamine first. The valley opens up. The same image. Ashes everywhere. Smoke is everywhere. Cars are going this way. I'm going that way. And I go to the same exact shelter. And I'm just thinking the whole time, what am I going to see? Right? Is it going to be the same? Because if it's the same, if nothing's changed, then what the heck are we doing? Right? So get to the shelter. There's 2 volunteers in vests that are telling people where to go to park. Went to the parking lot. Everybody's parked in an orderly fashion. Thought that's a lot better. The placard spots were full, but they ended up bringing out orange cones, putting handwritten signs that said reserved placard parking and making more slots for folks. So that's where I parked. And I saw that donations have been coming in, but the donations management team had a receiving area, and so the curb cuts were still available. So I used that to get up to the shelter. I went through, I saw that the cots were spaced out. I could navigate, make my way through the general population area. We had the local independent living center. And depending on where you're at, probably that's called the Center for Independent Living. They were there, helping the social services team do cot by cot assessments to identify unmet access and functional needs. They had already looked at the facility. They were trying to figure out what accessible resources they could bring in. And they were talking to their consumers and clients, making sure that their needs were being met in partnership with local government emergency management. There were ASL interpreters and Spanish translators. And when I went to go look at the showers, I saw that they had physically removed the bar that had divided the doorway and made it inaccessible. So now everyone could access those accessible showers on day one. And so I have personally witnessed the power of integrated and inclusive planning. What we're finding now, having done this for long enough, is that jurisdictions that use integrated planning processes, right? Jurisdictions that have an access and functional needs advisory committee that they use to develop their plans, not just that they say, here's our EOP, email us comments within 2 weeks, but rather that they've got an AFN committee that they go through and develop the plan with them. We find that those jurisdictions respond quicker, more efficiently, and have better recoveries than jurisdictions who don't. We see a reduction in loss of life and human suffering, and in the time and financial resources needed to recover. And so while we used to say, oh, well, do this because it's the right thing to do, right? And it is the right thing to do. But that was our main argument, do it because it's the right thing to do. What we say now is do it because you end up with a better product. Do it because it'll save time, lives, and money. Do it because it's a best practice. Do it because as a jurisdiction, you will fail or you will succeed, but you will do it in partnership with your communities. You're going to succeed or you're going to fail, but you're going to do it together. So that's a bit about where we are in California, about what we've done, about what we're trying to achieve. And I will also say that while we've made tremendous progress, that we're not ready to hang the mission accomplished banner. Right? We're not saying that we're done or that we're there. We're saying that we've made progress, and yet we recognize that more work needs to be done. And so we'll continue to push with our partners in that direction. Now, I was thinking about this group, thinking about the work that everybody does. It actually reminded me, I said earlier, I've got kids, I've got daughters, 2 daughters. And if you've got kids, you'll know that even though, hey, same parents, same household, they're different, right? They've got their own personalities, they're unique, and they're basically born that way. Our kids are different, started at birth. Our eldest daughter, my wife was in labor for 23 and a half hours with our oldest daughter. I'm embarrassed to say I didn't know you could be in labor that long. I mean, Grey's Anatomy, they knock it out in an hour plus commercials. So 23 and a half hours later, like, oh my gosh. So when our second daughter was born, our plan was we're going to wait at the house until contractions were a little bit closer together. That way we wouldn't have to spend as much time at the hospital. And so, 10 minutes apart, we waited. 7, we waited. 5, we waited. At 3 minutes, my wife's like, we got to go, right? So we load up in the van. My friend's driving us. Now, we had a plan. We knew the path, the route. We had the go bag. We had everything ready. What we hadn't planned for is the fact that my wife went into labor during rush hour on a weekday morning. Do you have any idea what traffic is like during rush hour in DC? It was a parking lot. It would have been faster if I'd have gotten out of my wheelchair, sat my wife on my lap, and drove her to the hospital in my wheelchair than to get there the way we were going. And so my wife turns to me and says, I'm going to have this baby in the van. I just remember thinking, I don't want to be that guy. Right? We all know this guy. This is the guy you see on the news. It's like, they ask him, oh, how'd you do it? And he says something like, well, my instincts took over and I grabbed a shoelace and we made it happen. I'm not built for that. So I'm looking around like, what do we do? And amazingly, there's a cop car next to us. And so I had my friend roll down the window. And I explained to the officer in a very articulate manner exactly what was going on. And I think my exact wording was, help. I think that's what it was. And he asked, would you like a police escort to the hospital? I said, yes. And then he said, and I quote, yeah, we don't really do that. And he rolled his window up. And our hearts collectively sank. And my wife's getting emotional. I'm getting emotional. My friend who's driving us was like, how did I get roped into this? And I think what happened is that the desperation we felt oozed out of our vehicle and into that squad car, because he ended up rolling his window back down. And the officer asked, he goes, all right, so now I'm going to turn on my lights, stay on my bumper, we'll get you there. And the next thing I knew, we're bombing our way through downtown DC traffic, which is a side note. If you ever get the chance to have a police escort, do it. It's amazing. I told my wife, thank you so much for this experience. This is exhilarating. She was not as excited at the time. So we get to the hospital and the officer took off. I didn't get to say thank you. I don't know his name. Never got to shake his hand. We went into the hospital, and a very short amount of time later, our second daughter was born. And every year on her birthday, she has the same request. Tell me the story. So this last year, I'm telling her the story. And I start getting emotional. Because she turned 15. And I'm looking at this smart, kind, capable, beautiful young woman. And I couldn't help but think, what tale would I tell if it hadn't been for the right person at the right time in our lives when we needed them the most? And I share that with you because by virtue of who you are and the role that you play, each of you has the unique opportunity to be the right person at the right time in the lives of the communities that you serve. And the people that you help may not ever know your name. And they may not ever get to shake your hand. And they probably won't ever stop to say thank you. But the impact that you will have had on their lives will be life-changing and oftentimes life-saving. And it's an awesome responsibility and an immense privilege. But it's a lift. integrated planning is a lift. But it's worth it. So let me leave with this commitment. You lift, and I'll lift. And together the communities we serve will ascend. So with that, let me turn it back over to Mark, and then we'll open it up for some questions. We'll take it from there.
Thank you very much, Vance. That was really interesting perspective, and I really appreciate your sense of humor too. You're you got a good delivery where, yeah, I really appreciate that. And yeah, your perspective on this is really interesting and valuable. And I know I see at least one question in the Q&A feature there. But before we get to that, selfishly, I'll cut in line. I just would like to know your perspective on a very specific concept with regard to functional and excess needs registries. That's one concept that we've sort of toyed with to varying extents in our county. I wanted to know again from your perspective what your take is, pros and cons on that sort of concept.
Yeah. So, look, the idea behind a registry kind of tends to make sense, right? Like, oh, well, if we know who needs help, we can send assistance when it's needed. But the functionality, the reality of registries is that they don't work. We've seen major investments in these registries, and they just don't work. And it's for a variety of reasons. I mean, one, people just don't sign up. It's a very small sliver of the AFN community that actually signs up. Secondly, once people sign up, it's almost impossible to keep that information current, right? I change addresses, I change phone numbers, I change email address. I move in and out of the area, and I don't update that info. On top of that, let's say that, the info is correct. There's not going to be enough resources to send to everybody. And so what happens is that we see this dangerous assumption on the part of the community that says, oh, when it comes to preparedness, yeah, I'm done because I'm on a list. Right? Like I signed up for a list, and so Mark's coming for me. So I'm good. When what we need to be preaching and teaching is have a personal evacuation plan. Have a process in place. Have a go bag. Plan and prepare so no one's coming for you. Right? The thing with these registries too is, let's say you've got my name and it's the info's all correct. And amazingly, there's actually a resource and you send it to my house. How do you know I'm there? Right? I could be at work, I could be on a date with my wife. I mean, there's no telling where I'm at. Now you've sent a resource, it's a limited and a valuable resource somewhere where it can't be utilized. So we've actually got entire guidance that we've got on our website, and people can download it. And ultimately it says our recommendation is when it comes to registries, don't do it. And then we go on to say, but we recognize that some communities will choose to go that direction. And so if you do choose to go that direction, please keep this in mind. And then we outline, all the things that you got to be looking at if you're going to choose to go down that road.
Yeah. A lot of those, a lot of your comments are sort of concerns and thoughts we've had too, but it's obviously means a lot to hear a person like yourself state those too, just again, with your larger perspective on this and working for an environment that's as complicated and massive as California is. So appreciate that. Kevin, I'll turn it over to you to coordinate the Q&A. And again, if anybody has a question that is that they are wanting to pose, please put that into the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen on the Zoom presentation.
Thank you very much, Mark. I also want to thank whoever started the closed captioning. I missed that, and I appreciate that someone did that. So we have
That was a test, Kevin, right?
we have one question so far from Nicole. It says, California is prone to wildfires and earthquakes. Have you dealt with other disasters such as flooding or other weather-related events?
Give me 1 second. I want to take a drink, okay?
All right.
Thanks. The disaster I was dealing with right there was a very, very dry throat.
A drought.
California drought. Yeah, so I gotta tell you, California is enormous. And our risk landscape is huge and diverse. So let me give you an example. Just over the summer here, we had one period of time where we were dealing with extreme heat. We had, in my hometown, for example, it's 115 degrees for several days with no overnight relief. And that happens statewide. At the same time, we were dealing with extreme heat. Of course, that dries things out. So then you're worried about wildfires. And at the same time, we had concerns about grid reliability. We were literally minutes away from losing the entire grid at one point. And so at the same time that all of that was going on, we ended up with what started as a hurricane and ended as a tropical storm coming up in Southern California. And so we end up with all that, and in the very northern part of the state, we had freeze warnings and flash flood concerns. So, one of the things that is just a lot to wrap your arms around is that these disasters all happen at the same time, right? I wish Mother Nature did that thing where she said, well, hey, one at a time, we'll wait till you're done with this and then we'll give you something else. She does not. And in California, we get a lot of opportunity to practice these different disasters. And, that's just a natural disaster. We also deal with terrorist events and chemical spills. And, other not so fun things. So we do spend a ton of time and resources dealing with wildfires, but there's a lot more on that front too.
Thank you very much. Are there specific differences related to access and functional needs for the different types of disasters you deal with? And what might some of those be?
Yeah, so, sometimes it's going to depend, right? I mean, it's sort of the difference between if you're going to shelter in place or if you're going to evacuate somewhere. That's a different dynamic. But what we find is that the principles are the same, right? So everybody should be signing up for emergency alert notifications and warnings. That's going to help you regardless of what the disaster is. Because what you need is information and you need it quick. Everybody should have a personal evacuation plan. Because whether you're going to activate it for a wildfire or because there's a big storm event coming, you got to be able to get out. When we look at the way we communicate, especially as an emergency operation agency, everything needs to be accessible. We need ASL, we need foreign language, we need alternate formats, because we want to make sure that water gets to the end of the row. When we look at transportation, we recognize that it's not enough to have each county maintain contracts and agreements with intra-jurisdictional paratransit providers. but they need to build for surge capacity, which means having MOUs and agreements with transportation providers in surrounding jurisdictions. Right, and again, that's going to help you regardless of the disaster. If you've got to move people in a short amount of time, that's got to be in place. And then, we do other things like it's California, right? So it's always earthquake season. So we'll push, like we got a program right now that we work with the Centers for Independent Living, and we provide them with earthquake safety kits so that they can secure their offices, but then also with kits that they can give to consumers so that they can secure bookshelves and water heaters and all that stuff. Recognizing that for a lot of the consumers, they're going to say, hey, the safety kit's great, but I can't swing a hammer. Right, I can't physically install these earthquake mitigation resources. And so we partnered up with folks like Team Rubicon, and they'll actually do the install for free with those consumers. More than anything, what we strive to do is to maintain constant communication and partnership with the community because of a few things. One, we want to be able to, for example, with our statewide AFN stakeholder committee, I want them to know what's Callaway is working on, whether that's earthquake mitigation or whether that's the development of a state emergency plan. I want them to know what we're working on. I want them to have input on it. I want their feedback. But the other thing is, I need them to help me see around corners. I need them to tell me, hey, here's where the community is concerned. Here's what we're dealing with. Here's what you think is working, is not working. And it's as we do that, that we start to shore up more and more our plans and our efforts, hopefully in ways that are going to pay big dividends before, during, or after any type of disaster.
I don't see, I think we had one additional question in the Q&A, but it was similar to the one I had posed earlier about a registry. This was specifically asking of a potential database within a dispatch center, to help identify and expedite a response for an functional access needs population. But that's probably pretty similar to what we just discussed. If there is nuance there, please interject that, Vance. But if you think that's pretty much the same, that's fine too.
Yeah, we don't have there's not like statewide dispatcher database. One of the things though that I will say is, and this is sort of a great word, nuance. While I'm not a big fan of let's have a disaster registry, I'm 100% on board with saying that we have to work with community-based organizations and agencies that are serving people with access and functional needs. Right? So I don't need to have a registry, but I do need to be able to get information out to the Independent Living Center, because that center can then push out that life-saving info out to all their consumers and clients. If I'm working with the State Council of Developmental Disabilities, they can push info out to all their consumers or clients and customers, their constituencies. If I'm working with, Disability Rights California, if I'm working with TREDIF, if I'm working with all these different groups, they know the community. They know who needs resources, and you develop a push-pull type of mechanism, right? It's one thing for me to say, hey, Mark, I'm Cal OES, and here's what's coming up, and you should take the following action. And you're like, I don't know Cal OES, or maybe I don't trust government. But if that comes from a community-based organization that you know and trust, you'll read it, you'll act on it, you'll take appropriate steps. So while there's no centralized database, there are absolutely ways that you can reach out to the whole community by using partnerships with community-based organizations and other agencies to do so. We know, for example, like in California, we've got people that receive a variety of social services. Why not use like an in-home support service provider as a communication mechanism, right? You look at the DMV, people will list that they have a disability because they're looking for disability placard. Great. Can't we use that to notify people with disabilities about certain disasters in certain areas? Right. There's a lot of data sets that already exist. We just have to be a bit more innovative about finding them and using them.
Yeah, those are great points. One final question for me, and I don't see anything else in the chat right now, but so, and this is maybe something that again we can talk more offline about. You know, I'll just take our county as an example. We had a individual that was contracted through our Board of Health to work on functional and access needs integration, initiatives, and that person has since come and gone, and now we're kind of left. I feel like we're in a bit of a void of where our office, emergency management, is trying to take on some of those pieces and parts, but I'm sure we're missing certain aspects. And I guess my question for you is, what would be like a good source or example of a committee? You mentioned earlier an access and functional needs committee, its composition and I guess its objectives. Do you have a good source or example to point us towards where we could potentially replicate a similar concept here to address those needs?
Yeah, and I'm happy to either talk to folks or provide info or to connect them with other jurisdictions here, counties that have done this. It's going to be a little bit different based on whatever your demographics look like, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, these access and functional needs advisory committees are essential, right? They're really an important key element to making sure that there's inclusive planning that's taking place. And when we look at the composition, right, one of the things that you should have is organizations, associations, community-based organizations, all that are within the AFN realm, government and non-governmental, but it also needs to ensure that it's got people who have lived experience with access and functional needs. And advocates are important to have on there, and others, and you should be meeting quarterly, right? And again, the role shouldn't be, I want to email you our finished document or final draft, give me your thoughts. It should be, let's work through and develop this together. And we can talk about, if you'd like a separate presentation on, here's how to actually do it. We just met, or I do a meeting with we've got 58 counties in California, and each county's got an AFN coordinator. And so I host a quarterly meeting where we pull all 58 coordinators together. And we just had one of the counties talking about their best practices on developing AFN committees. So we can definitely get that info to you.
That's awesome. Yeah, that would be very helpful. I'd appreciate that. Let me just double check. I don't see any more questions. Kevin, do you have any final thoughts on your end?
No, I do not. I wanted to thank Vance for joining us. It's very helpful information that he shared with us. And thank you for being the last of our 2022 series speakers.
Happy to help close it out. Thanks for the invite. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much. And thank everybody for joining today too. And stay tuned for hopefully future offerings of similar speaker series into next year.
Yeah, and Mark, just a quick plug on our website, the CalArts website. If you go to the Office of Access and Functional Needs,
Okay.
we've got, it's called the AFN library. And it's a one-stop shop for AFN specific information. We've got guidance documents, best practices, videos. We've got, it's basically a clearinghouse of AFN info. I'll put the link right here. And I'd encourage you to take a look. There's a ton of stuff in there, including that guidance I was talking about on registries.
Okay.
And if there's something that you want, just download it. If there's products that you have or you like, send it to us. We'll put it in here too.
Awesome. I appreciate that. And for everybody's awareness, it's in the chat, the link to that site. And yeah, I just really thank you very much again, Vance, for your time today.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, team. Appreciate it.
Take
Have
care,
a great
everybody.
day.
Bye.